In this podcast, I will be talking about reality versus perception. I will be comparing them and interviewing a few people about their opinions on this matter. But before the interviews, first I want to read Plato's allegory of the cave and give my opinion on it. In the allegory, a group of prisoners has been locked up in a cave since birth, with no knowledge of the outside world, chained against the wall, unable to turn their heads. A fire burns behind them, giving off enough light to cast shadows on the wall. Occasionally people pass with animal figures among other objects. Because they have never seen the real world, they all presume that this is what reality is, and think of the shadows as if they are the real thing. Suddenly, one of the prisoners is released and led out to the real world. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he becomes disorientated and overwhelmed. When he is told that the shadows are not actually real, but are just reflections of the real thing, he could not believe it, because since birth he had seen the shadows as his reality. At first the shadows were much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes began to adjust and the real things became clearer. The prisoner then returns to the cave to tell his two friends about what he has seen outside of the cave, but they just think he's gone crazy because their reality is still the shadows. He also finds it difficult to see the shadows now, because his eyes have adjusted to his new reality rather than his fellow prisoners' reality. I think this allegory shows what I'm trying to talk about in this podcast. It talks about reality and how reality can be different to different people. So as you already know, in this podcast I'll be talking about perception in comparison to reality and relative to reality. And I think this study by Plato really sums it all up. How shadows are the reality to the prisoners in the cave, but the prisoner who has been outside of the cave, it is just a perception of reality now. And his reality are real things rather than just reflections. And just before I get to my interviews, I want to express my understanding of reality. To me, reality can be different to different people, because there is no one reality. If you ask me, there is infinite realities, and to be honest, no one is ever going to be able to understand them all. One thing I've always thought of is when I see the colour green, is the person sitting beside me seeing the same colour, or is what they see as green different to what I see as green? I'll never know. And the more I think about it, the more my head hurts to think that those people I know could be seeing completely different to how I see myself. If you ask me for one way to sum up what reality is, I would say it's a leaf in the wind. You see, every leaf is different, and the wind is always changing, so no leaf will be blown exactly the same way, just like in life and reality, where everybody's reality is slightly different. It could be very close to the same, but there's always some sort of difference, just like that leaf in the wind. Now to my first interviewee, Miss Andrews. What is your understanding of reality?
It's a great question, Shane. When I was your age, I thought I knew what reality was, but the longer I live, the less I think I actually know. Philosophy has made me question really every aspect of reality, and I do wonder whether we can actually know anything for sure, or if it's just what I perceive to be true. So it's a great question. And I think we know a lot more about our own minds than the physical world. So it depends what you mean by reality there. I think we know a lot about the things we see and hear, but as you know from our class experiments, our eyes and ears can often be mistaken. Remember, we looked at how we couldn't trust our senses with the optical illusions. Other examples are the whole area of taste and flavour, which is like a construction of the mind, a kind of illusion. So we think we know what's real, what sweet tastes like with our mouth, but in fact there are certain smells like vanilla and strawberry that trick our brain into tasting sweetness. You can read up, there are lots of experimental psychologists interested in the senses. They found that sounds also have a huge influence on what tastes food, and we know advertising knows this. For example, the people who designed Tayto crisp bags, they didn't make them noisy just for the sake of it. They know that if people hear the sound of the bag being crumpled when they eat their bag of Taytos, they will eat the crisps thinking they are crisper and fresher and crunchier. So our sense of colour is another area that changes our perception. I mean, Shane, would you enjoy a black yogurt, blue tea, or green ketchup? If things are labelled healthy as well, we think that they taste worse. So these are probably learned associations, but at the moment you perceive that taste to be real. So you really think it's sweet or doesn't taste good. Scientists have also found that if you play loud music, your taste perception goes down and you'll think the food has less flavour. If you think about being on an airplane and how noisy that is, they've also found that food on planes doesn't taste as good as normally. So you've heard the saying, mind over matter. This is just an example of how our senses can be mistaken on a daily basis. So if you can't trust your senses, how do you know where you get your knowledge of the world? How do you know what is real? And this is the problem for philosophers. We've had to try and define what we mean by knowledge, and that's quite difficult. We've done that in class, and we might have lots of opinions, beliefs and feelings, but do we actually know anything 100%? So imagine getting rid of any beliefs based on our senses. We have so many. Have you ever had a dream that you thought was real? I've often thought something was real, and then I'm surprised when I woke up to find out that it was just a dream. Or have you ever had a nightmare that caused your heart to beat really fast? Or even sometimes you have physical reactions to dreams. That's all our mind tricking us into thinking it is real. But even though I make mistakes with what I think is real, with my perceptions, does that mean I should distrust them all of the time? I mean, when I burn my finger on the pan or sit on something sharp, I think I know what that feels like, and that feels real. And it's hard not to think I'm speaking to Shane Collins right now and I have a body. There's a philosopher called Descartes, he's French, and he asked this question. He wanted to find out, could you know something for certain, like 100%? He would ask, how do you know that you are not dreaming now? He was very concerned about what you were concerned about. So he started to doubt all his beliefs as strongly as he could, just like we do, in order to see if there were any of his beliefs that could survive this doubt or his skepticism. He tried to discover one piece of knowledge, which is what I've been trying to do as well since I started on this journey of learning philosophy. While he was doubting everything, there was one thing that he said he knew for sure, and that was that he was thinking. If he was doubting, then there had to be something or someone doing the doubting, the thinking that things were wrong. So the very fact that he was doubting proved that he existed. So he argued that he is a thinking thing, because even if his thoughts are wrong, he's still thinking them. I don't know what you think about that, Shane, but he concluded that the physical world was not as important as in his mind where the thinking takes place. And I think for me too, that the physical world is less important when I'm thinking about what is real, and I focus what my thinking is to give it all that meaning. So using the tools of the mind like logic, questioning, rationality, I make sense of the world by thinking things through and then the process of trying to understand the purpose of life and what is happening in our world is the closest I have got to knowing something is real. So knowing that our perceptions are flawed and that we cannot know everything for sure is accepting my reality. But of course, everyone has a different reality, and that leads to more questions, really. If I know I'm real because I think, what would happen if I lost my ability to think? Would that mean I've no knowledge of reality? And does that matter? Is that real? This concerns me because I have a very close member who has, in my family, who has Alzheimer's. And when we talk, we've no shared memories or idea of a future or really who I am. We're just talking about our perceptions of being there. And often what she sees is only real to her. So as you can see, there's a lot to unpack in your question, Shane. But maybe that answers the beginning part of
I liked
the
how
journey.
you related reality straight to your brain and your thoughts and how you think rather than what's around us, what we see. Because that's our brain processing all that. So really, is reality in our head? I agree with what you're saying. I also liked when you were talking about the senses and how your senses can be flawed because your brain is still controlling them, so it's all in your head again, and again. Everything's in your head. Everything comes back to your head. So I find it interesting when you spoke about the French philosopher who was studying himself and questioning everything and came to the conclusion that his thoughts were his reality. I found that very interesting. And what you said at the end about your family member who has Alzheimer's, I'd be interested to see how they see the world now compared to how they saw it before. I know you can't ask that question because of what happens to your brain during Alzheimer's, but it would be very interesting if you could. And now to my second interviewee, Mr. Murtagh. How do you view reality?
Hi Shane, apologies, I'm a little bit late getting this to you. With one thing and the other, I just hadn't gotten around to it. I've also been thinking quite a lot about your question, what is reality? What is reality? My idea of what is reality has changed a lot over the years as I've experienced more, read more, thought more. When I was younger, I would have said reality is what I can sense, what I can see, what I can smell, essentially what I can believe, I suppose, through experience. If I've seen it, it's real, which is a very narrow-minded, ignorant and perhaps naive view of what is reality. As I got a little bit older, I got a little more, I guess, idealistic. I started to believe in the possibility of aliens, or things that I hadn't necessarily seen. But I suppose maybe its arrogance diminished a little bit. Just because I can't see it or understand it doesn't mean it can't be real. I'm just a human on one planet in one galaxy that's ever expanding. So I suppose I became more open to the idea of possibility. Then in more recent years, I suppose I became more, when I was studying, I became quite fascinated by the romantic movement within art and philosophy. And whereas before I might have been, a rational thinker and constructed my realities through rational thinking, I'm not a very rational person, to be honest. The more self-aware and the more I understood myself, the more I realized that I'm not a rational person. I'm an emotional person. I react to things often based off of my emotional response. And I think that the way I've thought about this is that one of the most real things you can experience in life is terror. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, in the same way that, if I was swimming and I saw a shark fin, I'd be terrified. I also get a kick out of horror movies and roller coasters. So I feel like terror can be it can be a great motivator. You can scare yourself into doing something that's actually beneficial. It doesn't always have to be a near-death experience or something like that. And terror brings out huge emotions, and I feel that my reality these days is mostly constructed off my emotions, my emotional reaction to certain things, whether that's love, fear, hatred. I don't experience a lot of that. I mean, satisfaction. I think I only became a teacher in more recent years, and with a kind of, I feel like I've found like my place in the world for the time being anyway. And when you have that kind of solid basis, you can kind of reflect a bit more. And for me, at the moment at least, I'm shoehorning myself in with the romantics. Not all about love and doves and all that, but in a kind of philosophical or artistic sense. I feel like my reality is constructed through emotional responses to things, and that can get you in trouble. But it also makes the world quite a beautiful place for the most part as well. It's a good question. What is reality? I'm open to suggestions, but yeah, that's the best I can think of for the time being. I hope that's of some help to your philosophy project, and I'm looking forward to reading and experiencing your philosophy project soon. If there's anything else that I can help you with on it, please do get in touch.
Wow.
Take care, Shane. See you soon. Bye bye.
I find it interesting how different your explanation was in comparison to Miss Andrews, which really proves my point that reality is different for everybody. I find it very interesting how you went through a kind of roller coaster of feelings in relation to reality throughout your life, and how it changes for you and has changed for you, which is very interesting. And how you described terror as an emotion that can be felt in two ways. One as just being scared, and one as something to motivate you. I never had thought of it like that. We have now came to the end of my podcast. I would like to just thank Miss Andrews and Mr. Murda for letting me interview them for this podcast. Thank you, and goodbye, and keep being philosophical.